We are live with Diabetes 180, and our topic for tonight is can the pancreas be healed? So, announcements as always, we have our chat room open for those who have questions as we go through our presentation. That's the benefit of doing this live so that you can get your questions answered on diabetes. We will also be able to present you with factual information that you could put into work today if your goal is to reverse diabetes, or in the case of type 1 diabetes, minimize your use of insulin and lower end medications. So, most people are aware of what causes diabetes in type 2 diabetics: insulin resistance, right? Not all of us understand the dynamics of insulin resistance and how you become insulin resistant, and that's what I want to really focus on. At the end, we are going to answer the very important question: can the insulin producing cells in our pancreas, known as beta cells, be restored? Okay, so if in type 2, the case of type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes, the beta cells are destroyed, right? Or can they be restored? Can they be renewed, rejuvenated to produce insulin again? It's a very complicated question. So I think it's best to start from the beginning, and starting from the top, basically discussing what causes the body to become resistant to insulin, what causes the body to get to the point where the beta cells are destroyed. Okay. So, what I want to do tonight is go through a step by step approach. It's a 6-step process of beta cell destruction. Okay. Again, as we go through our presentation, this is your opportunity to ask questions. If you're watching for the first time, then let us know who you are. Where are you watching from? If you've been watching for a while, then we always would like to greet our long-time viewers. So you definitely greet us in the chat. Let us know you're here. All right. We try to keep our lives pretty short. I try to keep it 20 to 30 minutes maximum. So expect this to go pretty quick because we're going to cover some really good information very fast. And of course, forward this to those, your friends, family, any loved ones, anyone who's living in a state of insulin resistance, that can benefit from this presentation. All right. So again, we are answering the question: can the pancreas be healed? Can beta cells, insulin-producing beta cells, be restored when you have diabetes, specifically type 2? But the information we cover also addresses type 1 diabetics. Okay. So don't change your channel if you're type 1 diabetic. You could still benefit from this information. So, like I said, we're going to go through the 6-step process. There are six stages, and I want to give a shout out to our friends in Mastering Diabetes. If you have not read the book Mastering Diabetes, shame on you. No, but probably never heard of the book. But Mastering Diabetes is a New York Times bestseller. I Of all the books I've read on diabetes, it's the one that has the most um, information on what causes diabetes and how to reverse it. So I don't get any cut from for saying that. All right. So there's no bias here. Mastering Diabetes, great book. From that book, we're going to be taking some very key components. They actually introduced this 6-step process of pancreatic dysfunction, and how beta cells are destroyed. They do it in a very clear way. So don't reinvent the wheel, I say. I'm going to use their steps, and using some of their visuals, and I've created my own to guide you through what really got you to become diabetic in the first place. I find it's easy, it's just very logical. If you want to know how to fix something, find out how it was broken, right? If you want to know how beta cells are broken, how to fix beta cells, we got to figure out how they were broken, right? So that's what we're gonna be doing. Yvette, thank you for watching. Good evening. Good evening. I can't pronounce that name there, but ends at 1900. Thank you for watching. All right, so let's go right into it. So what is the first step of beta cell destruction? All right, the first step really comes with understanding how our body metabolizes food. Okay, specifically fat. So we have fat, we have protein, we have carbs. The body can use all three for energy. But something very specific happens when we eat a fat rich meal. Step one: fat enters the blood before carbs do. All right. We know carbs and protein has to be broken down, from carb to glucose, from protein to amino acid. Fat, once digested, is already fat, right? So it goes through the system fairly quickly. Once it gets to the small intestine, the beginning of our digestive tract, right after leaving the stomach, it gets picked up by the lymph system. The lymph system then transports this fat from our diet. And I should back up in saying the fat in the intestines actually gets transformed into what's called chylomicrons. So that's right here. If you're looking at the presentation there, the picture of the chylomicron, you could think of it as a fatty core with on the surface of it little proteins and phospholipids. So this what's called lipoprotein particle, this fat containing particle is transformed into a vehicle from the fat in your diet. It's transformed into a vehicle that can then be used to transport fat through the body, right? So we know this as lipoproteins. I'm not sure if that is that a term you guys are familiar with. Let me know in the chat if you're familiar with that term, lipoproteins. That is the fat carrying molecule, also known as a chylomicron. This fat containing molecule is picked up from the beginning of your small intestines, goes straight into your lymph system. The lymph system then transfers it to the blood. The blood then sends it to the body. So you can imagine that this is why fat can enter your tissues or the surface of your cells before your carb sources of food, before your protein in your food. Fat gets to the tissues first. That's very important to understand. Fat gets to the tissues first. Okay. Um, so someone's asking, can you see chats? Yes, I can see the chat. So if you have questions, definitely chime in. I'll be looking at this chat at the chat as we do our presentation. So what is the first step, the first stage of this beta cell destruction? It starts with understanding how fat is digested and absorbed into our body differently than carbs and protein. Fat gets first dibs. Our small intestines escort it through from lymph to blood to tissues. So it gets first dibs. As seen in this image, you go straight from the digestive tract into your lymphatic system to your blood vessels, being carried by these chylomicrons or lipoprotein vesicles that then can transport it through the blood, right? It gets and it arrives our cells before other macronutrients do, all right? Step two, this is also very important to understand that fat can enter the tissues without insulin. Okay. So at this stage, when fat is going through the blood and eventually ends up at the door of a tissue cell, whether it be a liver, muscle, right? It's accepted inside that tissue without insulin. Without the need of insulin, fat can cross the cell surface. Insulin can help the process for sure, but it doesn't need insulin. Now, of course, you know anything about diabetes, right? That's a big difference. That's a big difference between fat and glucose. Glucose needs insulin to enter the cell. I like what one person says is it's like a vampire, right? Vampires can't go inside your house without invitation, right? Glucose can't enter your cell without being invited, right? How does it get invited? Through insulin. Fat doesn't need invitation. Fat will force its way in, right? Whether you need that fat or you don't need that fat will go inside that cell. This is because fat is mainly an energy storage molecule, right? It's a great way to put away energy for later. I like to call it the freezer space, right? We have our fridge, we have for storing food so that when you're hungry, you can go right to it, right? And we have our freezer, the freezer for food that is going to be stored long term for when you're running low on food storage. You could go to the freezer. Think of fat as your freezer space for food energy, right? Your body has a lot of freezer space. That's what leads us to the third stage. We're going pretty quickly through this, guys. The third stage of beta cell destruction, okay? And I'm going to put it all together, I promise. The third stage of beta cell destruction is that fat can enter every tissue of our body. because number one, as we said before, it enters the bloodstream before any other macronutrient. Another thing I should say on that first stage is that that's why you feel full when you have a fat-rich meal. Anyone experience that when you have a meal that's rich in fat, that you feel like more satisfied, fuller, quicker? That's because even your brain is receiving a signal that, hey, there's a lot of fat in this meal. Slow things up. What gets slowed is the digestion of the anything else in your meal, the protein and the carbs. So any carbs and protein that's going from your esophagus down to your stomach, and before it enters your intestines, it's slowing down. It's slowing things down because it's saying, "Hey, we got to prioritize this fat. We got to distribute this fat because there's a lot of fat in this meal, and so everything else kind of slows down as far as digestion of carbs and protein. Fat becomes prioritized. Fat doesn't need insulin. In stage two, it enters tissues without being rejected, right? Because there's no invitation needed. The doors are always open. Okay, we're going pretty quick through the stage. We're on stage three now, where now, if you think about fat storage, that fat storage is everywhere. That freezer space, if you will, is everywhere. Your neck, your hip, your thigh, your butt, right? Under your armpits, around your abdominal area. Unlike other tissues where every organ on our body has a place. Your heart has a place, your liver has a place, your spleen, your brain has a place. Fat tissue is an organ, and this organ is everywhere. Okay? So the fat in your diet can find a place anywhere to call home. Okay, so when we eat a meal that's rich in fat, it will find storage. It has no problem with finding a storage place, right? There's unlimited freezer space for this fat all over our body, right? So I want us to think about this in this stage of digestion. All right, so let's think about this. The next step then is what happens at with this fat storage, especially thinking about the fact that there is no way to limit the intake of fat, because fat cells are very interesting, right? And you probably can attest to this by a personal example or personal experience, that when you develop a fat cell, right, it just swells up and grows and grows and grows. It's very flexible. A normal fat cell is very small, but you could overfeed this fat cell, or what's called adipose tissue. As a fat cell swells up, it grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and then something happens. Eventually, it gets too big and it ruptures, it bursts, like in this image, and the particles or the components of this rupture get spilled and invades surrounding tissue. And then you develop what's called inflammation, a chronic state of inflammation. And this inflammation, of course, causes insulin resistance. It's called adipose tissue insulin resistance, as this excess storage of fat leads to abrupt increases of markers of inflammation. Insulin is becoming resisted from this level. And this happens, of course, for many, many years before you become a diabetic. Many, many years before you actually become a diabetic. So, if you look at the difference between carbs and protein, right? Our tissues, our muscles, our liver, our pancreas, our organs are designed to have fat storage, but not in excess. A term for fat storage in, for example, a muscle cell is lipid droplets, little droplets of fat, right? So every organ has a capacity for holding and storing fat. I want us to understand that. But adipose tissue, the freezer space of our body, has unlimited, to an extent, unlimited storage space for a couple reasons. One of the main reasons is that it protects excess fat accumulation in tissues not designed to store excess fat. So the reason why we store fat around areas in our body, your neck, your abdominal area, your hips, your butt, in all those areas of your body, it's protecting the other organs for being overloaded with fat, because I mean, it knows that as you eat fat, right, it's going to store it very easily. So the body has an amazing way of putting that fat in places that protect other organs from accumulating excess fat. But even that has a limitation. Eventually, that tissue, that adipose tissue we have all over our body, can get overwhelmed, right? And then you have chronic states of inflammation because the cells rupture. Another thing that happens, interestingly enough, that fat cells, just like every tissue in your body, have oxygen demands, right? They have a demand for oxygen. The fat the fat tissues, the adipose tissue in our body can grow to the point where it outpaces blood supply. You can get to the point where the fatty tissue in your body grows so quickly that the blood supplying it is not enough, right? There's not enough oxygen delivery. Think of what happens when you sit on your hand for too long and there's decreased blood flow in your hand, right? It starts to go numb, right, and white, right, and painful. So same thing happens in this adipose tissue as it grows, as you grow in the ability to store that fat, right? It causes more inflammation through oxidative stress, not getting enough blood flow to those tissues. So there's inflammation from fat bursting, there's inflammation from the fat outgrowing its blood supply, and this leads to more, you guessed it, insulin resistance, right? So that is stage 4, step 5. In step 5, and I want us to understand these steps go on for years, okay? In step 5, eventually at some point that excess fat is going to have to start borrowing space in the muscles and the liver and other tissues that are not designed to store excess fat. Okay. And eventually the body says, okay, let's start storing fat in our muscles. I know we don't want to have fatty muscles. We want our muscles lean. That's how we're designed. That's how we were evolved. But eventually we can have excess stored fat in our muscle, excess fat in our liver, and then something very interesting happens. Insulin starts to get resisted in those tissues. Okay. Why is this? This is called the Philip Randall cycle, right? This is a phenomenon that says that if there is a high amount of fat in a tissue or in a cell, the fat will be prioritized for fuel. Your body can use glucose for energy. Your body can use amino acids for energy. Your body can use fat for energy. But if there is excess fat in the form of fat storage and in the form of fat that you ate, let's say you just ate a fat rich meal, the body is going to prioritize using fat for energy. And because of this, glucose becomes deprioritized. How does it deprioritize glucose? How does it say, okay, we have enough fat for energy, so Lewis, you got a carb-rich meal. I know you got a lot of glucose that should be stored, but we got to start resisting it, buddy, because we got to work on this fat storage. It resists insulin. It resists the key, right? That unlocks the door. Now, insulin's knocking on the door saying, hey, we got glucose at the door that wants to come inside your cell, but the body says, no, there's a lot of fat in here. All right, what's called intracellular, or in the case of the muscle, intramyocellular lipids. There's too much fat in here. So go away, insulin. We're going to resist you. All right, this is how insulin resistance happens because there's too much fat in the tissues not designed to store it as fat spills over from adipose tissue to muscle to liver. Right. Again, this process takes years as the body continues to resist efforts of insulin after every meal because there's fat plenty inside our body and in the foods that we eat. Glucose becomes deprioritized. I'm hoping I'm not losing anybody. I don't have much questions, so that means I'm hopefully doing a great job in teaching. But if you have a question, this is your time to ask. But how many of you guys know this? Know that it takes up to 10 years to develop diabetes because this 6-step process can take that long. It's almost like as we go through the steps of insulin resistance, insulin is causing the pancreas to cry out, the liver to cry out, the muscles to cry out. And the stage of insulin resistance is basically a long cry from the body before eventually the pancreas gives up and says, okay, we have diabetes, right? We can't go on anymore. right? It takes a long time. It didn't happen overnight, right? I love what the Bible says. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Our body has a lot of ways to kind of keep disease at bay until it can't compensate anymore. So in our final and last stage of this disease process, all right, is this beta cells get stressed. So there's a lot of fat build up in our tissues, our adipose tissue. There's a lot of fat build up in our muscles, in our liver, right? And then there's also, of course, the pancreas. The pancreas has beta cells that its only job or sole job is to produce insulin. That's the main job of beta cells, to produce insulin and to excrete insulin. So you can imagine these cells can also develop fat toxicity. It's called beta cell lipotoxicity. As beta cells get filled with fat, right? They become stressed, not only because they're filled with fat, but because insulin is being resisted. And then when insulin is resisted, they have to produce more insulin. So you're stressing me out and you're asking me to work harder? Your beta cell's like, what is going on? It could, and before long, this beta cell stress leads to beta cell suicide. The beta cells, okay, I can't take it anymore. You're demanding all this insulin. There's so much fat in our cells, and because of this lipotoxicity and increased demand for insulin, beta cells commit suicide, and that's exactly what it's called: beta cell suicide. The beta cells say to themselves, "It's better that I off myself than to live in your body." Okay, and then the question then, this goes back to the topic at hand. The question then is, after our beta cells are in this process of being destroyed and committing suicide, in which how long that takes varies by individual. Some might take a very long time, some very quickly. How much can you still operate on, right? The beta cells have a very small percentage of your pancreas, a very small percentage of your pancreas, right? Yet it is responsible for the insulin supply of the whole body. As the beta cells get to the stage step 6 of the process, where they too are now stressed, inflamed, and destroyed, how much of that destruction before you need medication, before you need insulin? And if you get to the point when your beta cells are being destroyed, right? Let's say you start out with 100% and you're down to 50, can that can you still operate on that 50%? Or do you need to restore what's destroyed? These are very good questions. Probably can't answer them all in one live, but I want to answer the question: can we heal? Can we get to the point? And my definition of healing would be: can we get to the point that even though our pancreas has very limited functional beta cells, and the mass of those beta cells, the amount of those beta cells is severely diminished because of years of being diabetic, can I still get to the point where I can heal my pancreas and start having normal blood sugar levels without medication, right? Many of us are using medication because our beta cells are so stressed, right? The amount of our beta cells are so depleted that now we need help. We need insulin, we need metformin, we need medications to help our bodies to process sugar. Can you get to the point where it can be healed? My answer is an astounding yes. You can heal the pancreas. But this is what's important, okay? Let's go to some studies here, okay? So this is a study done by that's published in American Diabetes Association, okay? So this should give us a lot of encouragement, okay? This is based on the Diabetes Remission Clinical Trial, Direct, and this is a quote from that article. Pancreatic beta cells that do not produce sufficient insulin in people with type 2 diabetes are not permanently damaged. This is important to note, though, during the early stages of the disease, and can be restored. How? To normal function through the removal of excess fat in the cells. That's very key. Why I underlined that last part is because it shows us what we need to do. If we want to restore the permanent damage, or what seems to be permanent damage, we can do it early on in the disease stage. Okay, it can be restored, but only when we remove the excess fat that is accumulated inside those cells. How do you guys think we can remove the excess fat from these cells? Of course, you could lose weight, right? That's a big one. But also, By eating less fat. By This is why in Diabetes 180 we promote a low fat, whole food, plant-based lifestyle. When you eliminate the foods that are high in fat, the foods that are highest in fat in our diet are animal foods, meat, dairy, eggs, and cheese, especially when it comes to the most harmful of fats, saturated fat, when it comes to insulin resistance. When we eat a diet low in fat, not only are you going to be losing weight, right? But you're not going to be introducing the cells to fat and chronically overfeeding fat, already stuffed fat stores. You do this long enough, the excess fat that's accumulating in the cells goes away, and so does the disease, right? But here's the thing. So it said early stages. What about late stages? So American Diabetes Association says this in a different article. All right. However, in type 2 diabetes of duration greater than 10 years, the cellular changes appear to pass a point of no return. So, um, reading that, it seems that there is a time frame. If you let the process go on long enough, that the destruction does become permanent. The amount of beta cells you've destroyed become irreparable, right? So, and basically, why this is so important to note is because by the time we are age 20, most of us watching are older than 20, right? I can guess, right? If I venture a guess, most of us are over 20. We stopped producing beta cells at 20 years old. Your body's not making anymore. So it's super important that we are, for the rest of our lives, after 20 years old, we are very careful to preserve the beta cell function we have left. And depending how long you've been diabetic, the beta cells that are in your pancreas are being depleted by the disease process going on as long as it has. We can get to the point where, in most autopsy studies, we know that diabetics have at the max 50% function, functional beta cells, right? 50% functional beta cells by the time they become diabetic, which to me is pretty impressive. That means your body can operate on even 60%, 70% function for a very long time. But once you get down to 50% functional beta cells, that's when you usually are diagnosed with diabetes. And then the question that probably you might ask is, well, Lewis, like, how much do I have? How do I know how much beta cells I have? Well, the only way we know how to measure the beta cell mass in a body is through after death, through autopsies, right? And this is what we learn from autopsies. Okay, let's see what autopsies teach us. So, based on autopsy reports, and this is a study published in NIH, autopsy studies report deficits in beta cell mass ranging from 0 to 65% in type 2 diabetes and 70 to 100% in type 1 diabetes. So we know, of course, those with type 1 diabetes is caused by the immune system attacking the insulin or the pancreas, causing this destruction. And with type 1 diabetics, whether or not you can restore that mass is definitely up for debate. And there's a lot of studies on stem cell research to restore the beta cells, right? But in type 2 diabetes as well, there's a large amount of beta cell mass that's destroyed by the disease, even to the point where you can have close to 0% left, right? So it's very important to know that if you're a type 2 diabetic, you want to preserve your beta cell function just like you were a type 1 diabetic. You want to make sure that you're making best use of what's left. But here is the hope. Most studies show that you could still get to the point where you have normal blood sugar levels, even on small amounts of functional beta cells, right? So some people say as low as 10%, right? Read studies that say usually on average about 25% of your beta cell mass being functional and getting to the point where you don't need medication still. How do you do it? Well, we talk about that every week. We do it by, again, eating a diet that's low in fat, and in so doing, making our body super sensitive to insulin. The key here is to eat in a way that encourages insulin sensitivity and puts the least demand on insulin. And what diet is that? Is a diet that is rich in whole plant foods and minimal to no animal foods, right? And that's why people get so much good success when they go through coaching programs like ours to learn how to transition to a diet low in fat and rich in whole plant foods. right? If that's something that you are willing to do, or something that you're trying to do and struggling, then maybe coaching is for you. Check out the links in the description section of this video. And we have free consultations to see if a 12-week coaching program is a good fit for you. We also have a community online membership where you can join in with other people who are looking to maximize their sensitivity to insulin, promote the health, and stop the destruction of their beta cells by eating a diet that's low in fat and rich in whole plant foods. So those are ways we can help you out on this channel. Either way, we are here every Monday night, Monday at 7 p.m. to talk about strategies and studies and the science behind diabetes reversal. Okay, but it really is not complicated, guys. It really is simple, and I hope that you learned a lot. Share this live with other people who may still be struggling with their diabetes, who are asking that question, can my pancreas be healed? I've been a diabetic for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I don't care what studies say. I don't care if you've been a diabetic for 2 decades, right? The key is to learn to eat in a way that maximizes your sensitivity to insulin and preserves what's left of our pancreas. Whether or not you can restore what's lost, you can preserve what's left, and you can halt that destruction. You get guaranteed, right? And we've been experiencing this for the last 2 years we've been in business. So, as always, beloved, I pray above all things that you may prosper and be in good health